A lot of the stuff we've talked about, particularly around welfare, it would be great to get more money into the sport. So
Yeah,
since you've been in your position, you've achieved getting a voluntary levy, but I think you're looking for a bit more now, aren't you?
Well, from the beginning of this year, we achieved what was almost it's impossible, which was getting the online contributions in by bookmakers. And just to remind people that, you know, the Greyhound board is mainly funded by voluntary contributions from bookmakers on the Greyhound product. Historically, that's always been on shops and retail, but as from this year, we got it from the online, which is great until the government came in and decided they were going to stop the FOBTs, the fixed odds betting terminals, and the odds on those. So you've seen quite a significant downturn in terms of bookmakers retail. They've seen shop closures, and that of course has impacted on us in terms of our finances. Which effectively means that we've wiped our face in terms of what we're getting on for the online contributions versus what we get from retail. So, and I've already said as part of this interview, we're in the region of about £8 million we get a year. Now, in real terms, that should be at least double that. And for our ambitions, our welfare ambitions, but also what we want to do for the sport in terms of trying to encourage, you know, new people into the sport, new incentives, for prize money, all those sorts of things that are all part and parcel of what we get from the fund. That's going to take an awful lot more money. Now, there's two routes for that. Either that's continue to negotiate with bookmakers about paying a more appropriate rate, or it's about pursuing again the unicorn on this, which is about having a statutory levy, which is the same as what our colleagues in horse racing have got. Now, I personally would love to see a statutory levy. I think there are some bookmakers out there who actually would fully concede if a statutory levy was given. And the reason that a statutory levy's never really got off the blocks is, one, because it's tied in with legislation around Europe, and here we are apparently Brexiting, so that might be easier. But also in terms of the fact that, you know, we keep reminding politicians that greyhound racing is more unique than horse racing. You don't have a jockey on the back of it trying to slow or fasten a horse up. You know, once that dog is out of the traps, it's on its own merits 9 times out of 10. So we do need more money, but I'd like to get a negotiated path on it. The easier aspect would have to be to get a statutory levy. And we continue to push politicians of whatever government that's going to look like to go down that route, all in the name of welfare.
How likely do you feel like it is?
Well, if it wasn't for the fact of what we've got currently going on with Parliament, I'd say, you know, with Mims Davies was Sports Minister, and we had David Rutley as the animal welfare. I mean, David Rutley came along to the Derby final night and was guest of ours, and I have to say that he was massively impressed on what he saw in terms of the care and welfare and the integrity of the greyhounds that were being raced, and the, you know, just the sheer vista of what Greyhound Derby nights, final nights, all about anyway. But of course, both those people have now moved on because of Boris coming in. We'll have to wait and see what's going to happen after the general election, which hasn't been announced in December. But I think we've got much more support in government, be it on the Labour or Conservative bench, than we ever had before. So that comes back to what my role is to make sure that relationship building continues.
It would make a massive difference, that income.
It would. I mean, just think about what we're achieving on the budget that we've got, and that budget's not getting any better. Imagine what we could do with twice that amount of money.
You've touched on the Derby at Nottingham for 2018, obviously confirmed to be there again this year, or next year I should say, 2020. What did you think of it?
I think it was their first attempt at it in terms of Nottingham running it. I think they had problems front of house. Both Rachel and her brother have spoken about that in terms of what they want to do right for next year. As you said, they've got it again next year for 2020. And I think they'll do their level best to try and resolve that. So taking that sort of emotional part of it away, I mean, for me, again, it was about the fact that there were the fewest amount of injuries that we've had at a Derby contest for many a year. Yeah, and kind of have to be grateful to Nottingham Derby. What would have happened if Nottingham hadn't come forward? Well, there was, in the same way there was this year, I mean, Central Park had registered an interest in it, but then never came forward with a proposal to take that forward. I mean, we all know that the prospect of there not being a derby outside of, certainly in peacetime, is unheard of. So it's one of those things that it concerns us. It certainly concerns us as a board. And I know people have sort of said, well, why can't we step in and why can't we, either incentivise the derby or otherwise, assist people in trying to apply for it. And I think there is some appetite from the board to do that. but it's in what format. You've got to be careful about just providing cash inducements to get people to take it up, because it's all, it's not just about the finances, it's also about is it the right track, is it the right distance, and those sorts of aspects we need to look at as well. But my view is that regardless of what happens at Nottingham next year, for the derby thereafter, I don't want to get into a year-by-year bidding on this. It's not great. For those people who own dogs, they always want to know where the derby's going to be so they can buy the right dogs for the derby, because everyone wants a derby winner. So for me, I would much rather, as with the board, see the derby homed somewhere. I mean by homed, for the next 3 to 5 years, it's got a base to work from.
We know that Ben Keith and Star Sports love sponsoring the derby, and long may that continue. But it brings me on to the question about sponsorship, and we've touched on how difficult it is to get sponsorship. Would the GBGB step in financially to save races or to contribute to prize funds if it meant losing a classic, for example, like the Oaks or something, if there hadn't been the money there?
There's been lots of criticism in the last year. I mean, I think Rab's been fairly vocal recently about the select states and the prize money in that. I think it's, in all honesty, it's not the GBGB's place to come in and prop up prize money and run money, etc., and things like that, purely on the basis that I think it conflicts with what we're here to do. What I do think, and one of the things that the ambition of the board has got again, is to actually recruit a commercial director onto the Greyhound board that can look at sponsorship deals, go out there, talk to companies, as you've already highlighted, that may or may not get targeted by people who are against greyhound racing, but to target them for us in such a way that we can bring new sponsorship into the game. You'll always have issues about, well, where does that sponsorship then go? And you have to look at the classics, in all honesty, as a priority. I think it's more GBGB can be doing. It isn't necessarily about literally putting our hand in our pocket. As I've already explained, there's not a lot of cash in the pocket anyway.
But that is something you're intending to do, is to employ a commercial director to go out and seek sponsorship?
Last week at the board meeting, it was agreed by the board that we would now take that step. I mean, again, most people won't realise that there was a commercial director that sat on the board. They were non-executive, which meant they came and went, because they had another life outside of greyhound racing, presumably. In the time that I've been here, so the last 4 years, there hasn't been that commercial director. We've interviewed a couple of people about, as non-executive, to see whether or not they wanted to take it and whether or not they were right for us. And on both occasions, they weren't quite there. So it makes more sense to actually employ someone to do that work on our behalf. So they'll look at the commercial aspects. They'll also look at marketing as well. But for me, one of the big ticket items I need to look at is about bringing more sponsorship into the sport.
I'm probably living in dreamland with this next question, but would you like to see people and all the different fractions of greyhound racing working together more, pulling in the same direction?
Pinch me, if that could ever happen. That people have got their own agendas out there. It's the same, as I said, probably in other sports and other walks of life. But I think it's when people in the greyhound community they've got their backs to the wall, they then come out fighting. Well, our backs aren't against the wall now, in all honesty. I think we're trying to do the right thing. There are people that would love to go back to some of the halcyon days of greyhound racing in terms of the spectacle. The fact that you've actually got audience at tracks, dare I say it. But for that to happen, people have all got to come together and they've all got to be wanting the same thing. And what I'm saying is, look, we're here, we're willing to do part of that, but it's not just the Greyhounds board to be doing that. It needs everyone to be involved in it.
You've also introduced the Apprenticeship Scheme. Would you deem that as a success? And how important is it that we do get more young people into the sport?
Has it been a success? Yeah, it has to have been a success, because we started off with 17 people this time last year that went onto the Apprenticeship Scheme. We're now down to 7, so we've lost 10. But even though those 10 that have gone off the scheme, it wasn't because they wanted to necessarily, it's because it goes back to the fact that you've got staff out there, they are all kennel hands, that are working to trainers, and those trainers are under the cost to get dogs ready for racing. So the idea of having off the job training is I think most trainers, it's taken them by surprise as to what that involves. Having said that, I've been to quite a few of the sessions involving the apprentices, and we've had sessions at the Nottingham University where they've looked at anatomy and physiology and things like that. Even some of the trainers, I can see one of the trainers talking about a gracilis injury and keeping the dog off from any training for 6 weeks. Professor Richard Payne, who's there, who's an ex-greyhound vet in terms of track vet, saying you really don't want to be doing that. And this is a trainer who's got a lot of years under his belt in terms of training dogs. So it's incredibly useful for them and for their trainers. And I think it's one of those things that it provides a legacy for the sport, because we need to be encouraging people. People need to look at the sport and think, actually, I can see a career path there. And all too often that doesn't seem to exist. It's whether or not you know someone who's prepared to give up their Saturday night on the town, their Friday night also to go and look after dogs and take them to the tracks and race them.
We need more young people though, don't we?
We do, and we're alert to that, which is why we bought the Apprenticeship Scheme in the first place. And let's be clear, the ones that are on the scheme at the moment were already within the sport. So what we need to do is start looking at things like recruitment fairs to try and get people. Again, until such time as we've got things like welfare completely right, people aren't going to want to do that. The work, again, the good work that's been done around the Apprenticeship Scheme not only gives them the apprenticeship to work through over the 13 months, but it also gives them a qualified piece of paper at the end of the day, which means they can go to, dare I say, outside of greyhound racing and go into veterinary care and things like that. It also follows there that people come from the veterinary practices into the sport as well. So it works. It's just a question of keeping that momentum going.
It'd be very easy for me to ask you what you want for the future of the sport. I guess the more difficult question is, realistically, with or without the extra money that you're hoping to get from a levy, where do you see the sport in 5 years?
So it's not just me, it's where the board are on this, and I think we've got a trajectory that we want to get to. A lot of that's about, obviously, much of what we talked about today in terms of reducing avoidable and unnecessary deaths within the greyhound community around what they're doing. I think that's very achievable, even with the money that we're getting now. I think there needs to be a clear plan as to where the sport's going in the future. I hate the term, as I said already, about declining industry, because it doesn't have to be. But what it does take is universally those people who are involved in the sport already to band together to make sure that it is sustainable. We do need a clearer outlook in terms of where we are. You've already touched on the media rights, but that is something that's going to have to be fulfilled in the next probably 3 years maximum before we've got a clear idea where we're going. And we need more support for the sport around both politically, but also in terms of commercially. I'm hopeful of the fact that we've got the right people, or we're getting the right people in post now to make sure that in 5 years' time we can look back and be, you used the word proud earlier, but rightly proud of where we are. But I'm talking about as a whole sport here, not just what we're doing in the Greyhound board.
How challenging is your job? How do you find it
Not
challenging?
challenging at all. I work 9 to 5. I sleep very well at night. I don't do any work at nights or anything like that. My phone's never on, and no one said it wasn't going to be challenging. I knew that was going to be the case as well. But there are genuinely some real opportunities out there to take the sport and actually turn it into something that is much, much better. I keep using the analogy of Barry Hearn and what he's done around darts. 10 years ago, darts was completely in the doldrums as a sport. And whether you like it or not, he's still throwing 3 arrows into a bit of corkboard. But he has completely transformed that sport. Now, I'm not the same sort of personality as Barry Hearn. I don't get up and threaten bookmakers. Well, I've come close to it a few times in terms of what they're paying. But he's turned it into a spectacle. And this isn't my idea, but the idea of turning the greyhounds into the absolute superstars that they are of the sport, with some help from the trainers perhaps, but certainly the dogs are our stars, they're our prize. And I think, again, that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity as well.
Are you in it for the long haul?
Look, along with our chairman, I've undertaken to the board that my main ambition, aside from welfare, is to get more money into the sport. The targets on those are until 2023, so unless I want to do something horrendous and get sacked by the board, or I'm just not fulfilling my job, then perhaps in 3 years' time I'll decide to call it a day. That for me is a long haul. It'll have its piece out of me, and hopefully I've delivered something back to the sport. So medium to long haul. I'm not going anywhere just yet.